This video contains gratuitous use of profanity and uncomfortable pauses to compensate for lack of professionalism and original thought. Viewer discretion advised.
Coming to you live from Cypress Hill Cemetery, we bring you the Nerdy Manroom show. A monster, I am beyond my regular excitement. I am super pumped for this episode as we are interviewing the youthful legendary, not to be confused with older legendary, Mr. Howard Mackie, creator of Danny Ketch Ghost Rider, Rider on the Clone Saga. So many things to get into with him, but we got a special interview for you guys, and we're super pumped.
Yeah, so what we're going to do right now, instead of doing any Geek Week, and we also probably won't do Nerd Out at the end because we actually had a very, very good and very extended interview with Mr. Howard Mackie. So we're going to take you directly into that. And then once the interview's over, we'll come back here and we'll close out for the day. But just for instance of this week, because we did such an expanded interview, which was so much fun, and we actually finally had to say, okay, we've got to let this man go back to his own life before we take up his whole day.
We reluctantly turn you loose.
Yeah, but hopefully you enjoyed the interview, and we will be back here shortly after that. So for now, let's go straight to the interview.
All right, everybody, welcome aboard. And we got the legendary Marvel creator, Mr. Howard Mackie, childhood hero of Mind of Monsters. Thank you, sir, for being here today. So for those people that maybe have lived under a rock for the last, 30 years or so, 40. Tell them a little about yourself, sir.
Well, funny you asked the time, because 40 years ago this week, I started working at Marvel Comics. I had mentioned earlier, I made the natural transition from working for an exporting company as a traffic manager, shipping strip mining equipment to Australia and New Zealand, to working in comics. And I got hired by Mark Grunwald 40 years ago to be his assistant editor. And then it went on. I didn't expect it to be a full-time job for him or a lifetime job.
You expected it to be a placeholder.
Yeah, it was one of those things where I was unhappy in my other job. I grew up with a gentleman that you may be familiar with by the name of Mike Carlin, who went on to become the editor-in-chief at DC Comics for many years. But Mike and I grew up together. We used to go out and do stuff, and he got tired of hearing me whine about my job. That they were great. I worked with wonderful people, but it was not, the most satisfying.
Shipping and receiving is not for everyone.
Exactly. And actually, some of the best time I spent in Georgia actually was in Savannah. I had to go and supervise the loading of a container ship that was going to Australia. And that was a kick, actually. I got to hang out there and hung out with the dock workers who...
So you've been down to River Street then?
It was a long time ago. So my understanding is Savannah is even nicer now than it was then. And it was pretty nice then. And I hung out with some nice people. But anyway, I started working at Marvel 40 years ago. And actually, the first day I walked into the office that I was going to share with Mark, and there was an attractive young lady who was sitting on the couch, and I thought, oh, this isn't going to be a bad place to work. Cute women here, and well, she is actually walking our dog right now. We've been together for 40 years, so
it was that life altering.
Well, exactly. She was the attractive woman who I was interested in, and it took a while, because she was not interested in me, but here we are 40 years later. But so I was mostly working as an editor in the beginning, assistant editor. We did the Avengers line of books, so Cap, Iron Man, the Avengers West Coast, and etc. And it was in that period that I became a reluctant writer. I mean, I was creative. I enjoyed writing, but I didn't want anybody to read what I wrote. And I had a conversation with Mark Grunwald where it was right after Denny O'Neil, who was writing Iron Man for us, he got fired from Marvel. And so he was an assistant. I mean, I'm sorry, he was an editor, and he was fired from his editorial position, but that meant he was not going to be doing Iron Man for us anymore. And Mark and I were sitting down because Mark had hired David McLiney and Bob Layton to come back and take over Iron Man, but they didn't want to wrap up Denny's storyline, and we needed to have it wrapped up. So Mark and I were sitting down, and Mark said, we need to find somebody to finish up Denny's story. And I said, yes, we do. And he said, it needs to be somebody who knows what Denny was planning. And I said, yes, it does. And he said, it's going to be you. And I said, oh, no, it's not.
Oh, let's pump the brakes.
Yeah. And he gave me really a great response, which is a line I then used when I became a full-time editor. And then when I became a dad and my kids asked me, or I asked my kids to do something and they said, oh, no, not right now. Mark said to me when I said, no, it's not going to be me. He said, oh, Howard, you're mistaking what we're doing right now for a conversation. He said, you are going to write that Iron Man story. And that it was Iron Man number 211. I started out my career working with Alex Saviak as the penciler, which was fantastic because Alex is probably one of the best storytellers in the business. I mean, in terms of translating my words to pictures. And it really helped me learn to be a writer of comic books, because I got to see when I wrote something for Alex, how it translated to the page. And that helped inform how to do it going forward. And I was very fortunate. Alex is he was the artist on probably my first 4 or 5 or more jobs. I just kept working with him. He then went on, we did a run on Web of Spider-Man for a while, which was wonderful. And I see Alex at shows today, and I'm still very grateful that he was beginning. Anyway, to answer your question, as I said, I can ramble on and I can digress. That's what I do. I'm a writer, and that Iron Man story led to a whole series of editors coming to me once it was published and saying, I didn't know you could write. And I said, well, I think the jury's still out on that one, but they started giving me work, and it was, a lot of it was kind of low end. I mean, starting out writing one main Marvel character is amazing. I've had people, when I've done panels, and for some reason I get asked quite a bit to do how to break in to comics for writers. Mm-hmm. And I'm like the last person they should have on that panel, because the way I did it 40 years ago is very different than the challenges that would present to writers today. And B, I mean, you can't do it the way I did it.
You wasn't seeking it. They're seeking it.
Well, exactly. And I had a friend who worked in comics who, and that was the thing. Mike Carlin and I grew up together. He worked for Mark Grunwald as his assistant editor. Mike got promoted and suggested I interview for the job. And that's how I got the job. I think I skipped that very important part earlier on. And you just can't do it. So I got to, my first story was Iron Man, which is a big fucking deal.
Yes,
I mean, nobody starts out that way. And so I've had people, when I've mentioned that at conventions, like on a panel with younger, and everybody's younger than me, except early on, you introduced me as legendary. I always blanch at that, because that just means old, which I'm seeing myself in the camera right now, and I understand. but there are people that are older than me. Tom DeFalco is more legendary than I am, and I like to rub his
Might as
face
well
as much
jab
as
there at the same
possible.
time.
Yes, but it was a whole series of lucky steps that got me into writing, and then I've had a career for then writing Spider-Man for many years, and certainly Ghost Rider is what really launched my career as a writer. And then I've written everything under the sun mostly for Marvel, and I got to do one Batman story for DC, which was fun.
Before we dive too much into Ghost Rider, because that's one of the things I want to pick your brain about a little bit. You said that Alice was one of the best artists you had as far as interpreting your work. So did you do the script style writing the Marvel way, so to speak, or did you actually break it down like this panel, I want to see this, and so forth?
Especially in those days, and I personally prefer what is referred to as Marvel method, but there's a lot of interpretations of what Marvel method means. Some people think it's like in the old days where Stan would just say to Steve or Jack, "Oh, I want to do this story with this character, and just go have fun," and that kind of thing. And then he would get the story back from them and script it. By the time I came into comics, we were all working plot first. So you wrote a plot, which is a general description of what happens throughout the story, and then the artist interprets that and breaks it down into the panels, and then those pages come back to me, and I would write the dialogue for it. But even within that plot method, it varies from writer to writer. For instance, I think I put more detail into my plots than some of my colleagues. Like my friend Tom DeFalco, he just writes like page 1, this is what happens, and just the description of what's going to happen on the page, period. And then page 2, this is what happens, page 3, etc. I can't work that way because as I'm writing story, I have to hear the characters speaking. So I always put sample dialogue in my plots. I find that it helps the artist know what the emotion is in a panel or something like that, but it helps me to remember later on what it is I was intending for the characters to say. Now that dialogue is, it never appears directly in the finished script and then on the page as it did in the plot, but it helps guide me along. But everything, I would say, 95% of my career has been working Marvel method, using plot first and then script later. It's harder to do now. The last job I did for Marvel, the Danny Ketch limited series.
Amazing, by the way. I
Thank
loved
you.
it.
Thank you.
I did too.
Please feel free to share that opinion with Marvel, and we'll see if we can do more. But that I did write full script, which is much more like a screenplay, where you say, panel 1, this happens, and this is what the characters say. Panel 2, this happens, etc. It's not my favorite way of working. While I have to have, because of what I do, I have a very visual way of thinking. I don't want to restrict the artists from, because they're the ones that are,
they're handcuffed at that point.
And they have to make it work. So I prefer to give, I feel like the plot script method allowed for a truer collaboration between the writer and the artist than the full script method works. And because unfortunately, and not casting aspersions on any of the guys working in the business today, but on occasion you see guys who think they think more visually than they really are able to do, because it's a specialized craft that we're working in that it's writing a comic book script is not like writing a screenplay, and it's not like writing a novel. All of those have very unique aspects, and this takes from both of those to create some, like I said, a collaboration between writer and artist, words and pictures, which is very important. But yeah, that's how I did most of my work, was plot first. And the problem is, there are not a lot of newer editors that even know, there are not writers that know how to work that way, because they weren't trained the way I was, and there are not editors that know how to edit the plots, because they were not trained, and there aren't a lot of artists out there that can interpret plot into a page. There are guys out there, but they're few and far between now.
Did it seem a little more like, I don't know, limited or restricting, so to speak? Because, now comics are far less pages than what you had, even 20 years ago. You would have 30-something pages, and now they're like, roughly 20.
Well, no, I mean, back when I was doing the bulk of my work, it was a comic book story was 22 pages. Monthly comics were 22 pages. Now, for the most part, I believe they're at 20 pages. And even that changes it changes the way I approach a story dramatically, because if I've written a few stories in my career, yeah, somewhere over 100 is how I like to put it. It's closer to 700-800, but you internalize how to do it. I mean, I trained in martial arts for years, and even though I haven't practiced in many years, I did karate, and I did certain forms, kata, so many times, and just so that you have the muscle memory there, that, I mean, today, it's probably been 30 years since I've done any of those forms. There are several of them that I could do in a heartbeat, just because I did it so often that once I start, it's just all going to come flowing. So the same thing happens when you're writing a story. I mean, I have an internal way of pacing a story. Where I've run into a problem is I have an internal way of pacing a story at 22 pages. If you take 2 of those pages out, all of a sudden I'm 3/4 or more of the way through, and I go, "Oh, wait a minute! This is and so I have to go back and
figure out where your ending point is for the next."
Exactly. Yeah. So suddenly I'm run out of pages, and I still have some stuff to say. So it is it's an adjustment. I mean, to your point where we used to have more pages or not, I mean, and yes, I did 44-page stories. I've done it all over the place. But many years ago, going back about 10, 15 years ago, I took on an editorial gig for a startup company in India. Okay. And there were a lot of guys that were hired, American guys who were brand new, had never written a comic script in their life. And they were given by the previous editor-in-chief, not me. They were given carte blanche to write as much as they wanted. And they were graphic novels that were sometimes 64 pages, 90 pages. And when I came on, I had to go through all of the stuff that was not, much of it was not up to, the big 2 standards at the time. So I was asked, how strongly I could work with these new writers.
Can you mold them and cultivate?
Well, exactly. So, and some of these guys, maybe they didn't know who I was, and that's fine. Not everybody should know who I was. or they just or maybe thought they were somewhat better than they were. And they certainly, whether they were, I'm not even making judgment on the quality of their work, but they were not experienced. And so I would come in and on more than one occasion ask them to make changes, and they explained to me how they could not possibly make those changes without adding pages, and that they absolutely could not tell this story with less than 90 pages or 60 pages. And I'd say, I'm sorry, but you're pleading to the wrong guy, because I've written, at that point it was 30 years or I said, and I wrote 600-700 stories, all of which were 22 pages. So I know that a full story can be written in far less than you're doing. And it just, and again, like I said, it becomes an instinct at a certain point. A lot of it is just about pacing.
Oh. How heartbreaking is it, as a writer, to have that director's cut versus the cutting room floor, so to speak?
Well,
do you find it makes you better?
I'm sorry, what's
or do you find it kind of makes you better as a writer?
Yeah, I like working with an editor. A good editor can make or break a comic book. I am not one of those writers who believes there's an expression that was used when I was growing up in the North, but I'm not sure in the South how much it is used. But it's when you say, I believe that my shit don't stink.
We very much use that down here.
Yes, and that's it. So I genuinely like working with an editor. I mean, a lot of my current work, I work with one of my best friends, who's been a good friend of mine for 40 years, Terry Cavanaugh, who also worked on the Spider-Man books and was largely responsible for the Clone Saga, which I'm one of
those that love the Clone Saga. Well, it got a little long-winded, but I mean, I actually enjoyed it.
That was not the plan originally. Somewhere around here, I have the original notebook. 3 months, the original Clone story that we pitched. Oh, wow. It was supposed to be 3 months, and then it became it was because it was successful at a time that the market was dropping.
Ride the ship till it goes down.
That we were told it had to be stretched, and then there's a lot of stuff about that. But what I always say to people is, if you hated the Clone Saga, it was all Terry Cavanaugh's fault. If you loved it, yeah, that was mostly me. But yeah, but Terry is a great editor for me at this point. We have a side gig called Inksmith. It's inksmith.com. There's a website. We do some custom comics, and we've got some outside projects going on. But because Terry and I have worked together for as long as we have, he can just look at my stuff and point and say, why don't you just change this to that? And I go, oh yeah, that's cool. And I'll just do it right away. And there's no ego involved at all. Because I really respect Terry, not only as an editor, but as a writer and a comic book creator. So I know we're coming from a similar background, because he and I started out as assistant editors together 38 years ago. So it's tough. I mean, and you said, how is it tough to look back and see the director's cut or stuff left? I don't read my own stuff after it's published.
Oh,
and that's a big part of it. For instance, when I did the recent Danny Ketch series for Marvel, it is all set in that time frame back in the 90s. So they really wanted it to have grown out of that period. So I had to do something I don't do at all, and that I had to go back and reread my work. And I think I reread like the first 16 issues or so of my Ghost Rider run. And I will tell you very honestly, I read the first few issues and I was heartbroken at how horrible it was, in my opinion, because again, a different person wrote that than,
We
he was,
all evolve over the course of 20, 30
well,
years.
also he was younger, he was new. And it was the first few issues were not my favorite. And then the fun thing was but I had to keep doing it because I needed to get up on continuity. I needed to remember how the character sounded and all that. But along the line, as I kept going forward, I got to see the book develop into what I remembered it was. And it was right around, was it issue 6 or 7, which is the Scarecrow issue. That, in Tex Ara's artwork was phenomenal in that. And I got to see the character develop, the book develop, but more importantly, I got to see me develop as a writer. And that was kind of fun to see it. Okay, well, this is really more what I remembered. Honestly, I identify a little bit more with the dark stories. And I would say the first 5, 6 issues, I was trying maybe too hard to make the character fit into the Marvel universe. But that was intentional.
That can be quite a challenge with a supernatural dark character.
Yeah, well, but I always felt that part of the reason, because that book was pretty successful for the time, and nobody expected it to be. I mean, and that's why I got to do whatever I wanted, because I mean, quite frankly, Marvel's sales department tried to kill the book before it launched.
Really?
If you want, I can just go right into how I got.
That's why I was wondering, like, how did you get approached about restarting it? How did y'all decide you were going to do with Danny and not Johnny, and
Sure.
All of this?
I got you covered. I again, I worked for my first job at Marvel was as an assistant editor for Mark Grunwald, and you shared a small office space. The office was wide enough for us to have 2 desks, with side by side with a pass through between the two. So you have to be comfortable with the person you're working with.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then we had bookshelves and all that, but we were right next to each other. And when you're working late at night, which you often do, or we often did back then with no overtime, you just talk about everything. And I was a big Ghost Rider fan before, and it was just going backwards a little bit. I grew up reading comics. I learned to read by reading comics. And then when I was about 13, 14 years old, I stopped because I discovered other interests. Girls being right up at the top of the
list.
Ladies,
turn your head a little bit.
Yeah. And so I stopped. But then I became good buddies with Mike Carlin, and primarily because I always describe it like we had like 2 groups of people that hung out together, and I was the nerdiest guy in the cool group, and he was the coolest guy in the nerdy group. And at a certain point, more and more people started peeling off of our groups, and we hung out in a similar area, and suddenly we were the only 2 left. And I remember seeing one day Mike with a comic book, and I said, "Oh, cool, comics! I used to like those," and that's how we became buddies. And then we started doing other things. We went to a lot of concerts together and all that. But when he got his job at Marvel, he started getting me free comics again. So for close to 3 years, I got caught up on continuity. He would just, "Hey, Howard, here's a stack of comics," and I would just read them, and I thought, "Oh, these are kind of cool." And one of the big books that he was working on at the time was Walt Simonson's run on Thor, which I loved that, and quite frankly, and Frank Miller's Daredevil. I mean, these were the books that I was getting.
Iconic runs, yes.
Yeah, I mean, so it was fantastic, and so Mark and I then and another one that he filled in the blanks for me was the end run of the first Ghost Rider series, which was written by Mark DeMatteis and drawn by Budiansky. And that was, I mean, come on, Flaming Skull,
What's
biker
not to love?
dude, touches of heaven and hell and demons. I mean, I just loved everything about it. And quite frankly, the coolest name in comics, as far as I'm concerned, Johnny Blaze. Johnny Blaze becomes Ghost Rider. I mean, you had me from page one. So Mark knew I was a big Ghost Rider fan, and at that point, I had gotten promoted to full editor, but I was doing much more writing at that point. I had done my Iron Man, but then I did a whole bunch of fill-ins. I'm sure everybody's familiar with the classic Chuck Norris and his Karate Commandos issue that I wrote. And, and then I did some licensing gigs like Air Raiders. And then I wound up getting a somewhat regular gig on Solo Avengers that then became Avengers Spotlight. And I was writing these 11-page Hawkeye stories. And so I had, some writing experience at that point. Mark showed up at my office one day. At that point, I'm a full editor. He was the executive editor. And he said, Tom DeFalco, who is the editor-in-chief, we'd like to bring Ghost Rider back. And I know you're a big fan, so why don't you give us a pitch? And I thought, oh, okay, cool. They're asking me to pitch Ghost Rider. Great. What I didn't know, and what would have frozen me in place, was I wasn't the only person they asked.
Oh, wow.
They asked probably 5 or 6 other people, and absolutely every other person had way more experience than I did. And if I knew that going into it, which probably why Mark didn't tell me, I would have said, it's okay. And then he would have had to have said, oh, you're confusing this for a conversation again. But so I did my pitch, and mine was the one they liked. And when I say pitch, it was more than that. It was an outline for a series. And that was the key thing. Was I said, yeah, I'll give you something. And he started leaving my office, and he stopped at the door and he said, oh, there's one caveat. You can't use Johnny Blaze. And I went, what do you mean? That's what I wanted to do.
That's the host.
Yeah. And he said, nope, we want a new character, so you need to create somebody completely new. I was disappointed, but it was a challenge. And so I did. And I think, as I always say, there's an old axiom for writers, which is write what you know. I took that a little too literally with Ghost Rider. I mean, if you're familiar, and I believe you both are,
Yes, sir.
with Ghost Rider, it all takes place in Brooklyn, in the Cypress Hills Cemetery. I grew up there. I grew up directly across the street from the Cypress Hills Cemetery. As a matter of fact, before the first issue launched, or before it was drawn, I went back to my old neighborhood, which was pretty much taking my life in my hand at that point, because the neighborhood had very much deteriorated, with a camera. And I walked through the neighborhood and the cemeteries taking pictures for Javier and Mark to be able to, not to replicate exactly, but so they had a feel for what
Just
it
give
all.
them a vibe of what they were working with.
And a lot of it is very true to form. As a matter of fact, just side note, I assume you guys have both seen the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies.
Yep.
Okay, in the first and the third movie, they do an establishing shot, as we refer to it in comics, of his high school. I don't know if you remember, the high school is in the background. You see the sport fields in the front, and in the very foreground is an elevated train platform. It's like, it's what we call the L in over there. So that high school is the Franklin K. Lane High School. I graduated from that high school, and they had to have CGI'd it out, but in foreground, if you go back and look, you'll see all the sports fields. But off to the left-hand side, as you're looking at it, that's the Cypress Hill Cemetery, and you don't see it in that shot. But the high school I graduated from and the cemetery which I hung out in, it was as close to a park as we had in my neighborhood, and we got in trouble. And quite frankly, and these references will mean something to any of you who read my ghostwriter, which is there was a guy in the cemetery who was the caretaker, and he did not like kids going through there. So he, with his very large German Shepherd, would chase us through the cemetery, and he had a shotgun with him that fired. He loaded it with rock salt.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't going to kill you or do.
Yeah, sting like hell, though.
And that would hurt. I never got caught with it. Some of my buddies did, and it was apparently very painful. So that's where I grew up, and I took bits and pieces from my early life to be part of Ghostwriter. But so I wrote the pitch. Mark and Tom liked it. I got assigned to an editor, who was Bobby Chase, who is still a good friend of mine. And the sales department said, we can't sell this. Primarily because it was an unknown writer with two relatively new artists tackling a character whose previous book had failed because of low sales. And so they tried to kill it. And to the point where I had to keep, they decided, no, we can't do it as an ongoing series. Let's do it as a limited series. So, and every time you do something like this, you have to restructure what you've written. The way, if I wrote something for an ongoing series, it's very different than if I wrote it for a 4-part limited series, which I then had to do. And then I had to write it as a one-shot graphic novel. So I had to rewrite it all over again. And then I had to write it as, back then, what we referred to as the Dark Knight format books. Again, a limited series, but in slightly enhanced form. I had to restructure it again. And eventually, and I heard this from Tom DeFalco only a few years ago, he just decided, fuck it. We're doing it the way I want to do it. And it was the ongoing series, and it launched and was very successful.
Absolutely. He was everywhere.
The person who was the head of sales had written a memo to the publisher saying we should not publish this book for all of the reasons outlined. And when the sales figures came on the first issue, she showed up at Tom's office with a copy of the memo and held it in front of her and ripped it into pieces and threw it in the trash and said, I was wrong. So it worked out. It worked out for Marvel, and it certainly worked out for me because it pretty much launched my career at that point. But key thing is, once I got to, I don't remember what issue, and sales continued to go up. That's the thing. It didn't just launch strong, which always can happen. You can launch really high and then sales drop. Well, the sales kept going up on Ghostwriter. And once that happened, I realized, oh, I've got a little cloud here. So that's
we got something here.
I brought Blaze into the book as soon as I can, because I just wanted to write Blaze. And the way I've described, it is that in the beginning, Danny Ketch was me. I mean, there were aspects. My dad died when I was 7 years old, and I was raised by my mom. And so there are aspects of his life by the cemetery, all that. Danny Ketch was me. He sounded like me. He acted like me, the whole bit. And then when I brought Blaze in, so Ketch was the young me. Blaze became the me in my mid 30s, because that's when I started having a family. And so I identified more with Blaze. And now I've pointed out to people, now I'm basically into taker territory, without the shovel in as much. My wife would kick my ass. So
But everybody should walk around with a shovel kicking ass. Now, come on.
I think so. That's certainly the way it was in my neighborhood.
So let me ask you this: before we delve into the popularity of where Ghost Rider really just sprung into everything, did you know from the start that you weren't that your Spirit of Vengeance was not going to be Zarthos, and that it was going to be Noble Kill, or did this develop over time as Zarthos entered in as a villain later down the line?
Kill was not me. That happened, after I left. I honestly, I genuinely don't know a lot about that, because two things. One, I said I don't reread my own stuff, and I definitely don't read a character after somebody has taken over after me. Which is,
do you kind of feel as a writer that bastardizes your project a little, or
no, because I knew what I was signing on for. Like, I don't, when you're working for Marvel or DC, you're work for hire. So that means I don't own any of the characters. I mean, even the ones that I created. I mean, there are arrangements that are made that means that when they're used in movies or toys or things like that, I get some money, but I have no control over those characters. And so if I read the character after I leave it, then my concern is always that I do a lot of these, but even back then, I was doing print interviews and things like that, where I don't want to be asked a question that my answer might reflect like my not liking what the following writer said. It's none of my business. I mean, it's their stuff. I've read some of what happened after, mostly I think the Wikipedia entry I've read. I've not read any of the comics. I think I've read one or two. I've read a few more of the more recent Ghost Rider series, like what Ed Brisson did. And I have a good Ed Brisson story. But I read his series. I did read some of the oh gosh, now what is the name of is it Robbie Reyes?
Robbie Reyes, yes.
Where he was in the car. Again, Ghost Rider in a car, not necessarily. I think Ghost Rider should always have a motorcycle, but who cares what I think? That's up to the writer and the editor. And I actually quite enjoyed that series because I read a bunch of those, and it was easier for me to read those because it was clearly not the character I had anything to do with.
It's not your creation.
Yeah, exactly. But I just don't. I prefer not to read stuff that happens after me, because I don't know about Noble Kale stuff. What I will say to you is I had ideas that were different than what ultimately the writer who took over went with. But that was up to them, and I'm not going to go too much into it, because who knows, I may wind up coming back and
I was going to say, I would love to get your take on the ending. Myself, I love the Zarthos coming back as a villain aspect. We literally just did a March Make a Madness where we put 32 heroes and villains against one another, and surprisingly, our fans voted Zarthos as the winner. He would come out supreme at the end, defeating Spider-Man in the last battle.
Zarthos versus Spider-Man.
It come down to those two, but we also had John Wick beat up Optimus Prime by our fans, so it was a wild ride.
Yeah. But it's comics. Things, I mean, one of the regrets I have, but only in a minor way, was at the when the series was canceled, was taken over. It was a new editor and a new writer. And that's when, they did the whole Noble Kale storyline and all that. Again, don't know anything about it. I was at that point, I was focused primarily on the Spider-Man books. And my editor called me one day and asked me to write a story with Ghost Rider. in it. And he said the reason was that the main Ghost Rider series had been canceled, and they wanted the character to be left in a place that, you know, in another 5-10 years, somebody could pick it up without the baggage. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but you know, when you leave a series and it is canceled in the middle of a storyline, there's a bunch
There's
of
a lot of unended things.
So they asked me to write the story, and I said to the editor exactly something similar to what I said to you, which is I don't read stuff written by another writer. So here's what, if you want me to write this story, I need you to tell me what things you want me to touch upon. And without my reading any of sorry, and I did that, and I just left in my recollection, because I haven't reread my own.
So we got Danny and Ghost Rider remerging, correct?
Yeah, yes. And that was the end of it. And unfortunately, the writer, whose name is escaping me right now, Ivan, I think.
Yes.
Yes. He thought that was me trying to take a slam at him. Like, you know, and I believe he got, upset with me. I don't know him personally, but
he took over what, like the last 24 issues or so, I believe.
You probably know better than I do.
Or so, something like that.
I don't. I barely know how many I wrote.
I think you wrote about 68 of them.
Okay. I have a.
I'm just a little bit of a Ghost Rider nerd. I'm sorry.
Well, I have a guy who is who's become a friend. Up here, and I see him only at conventions, and he's a huge Ghost Rider fan, and I've signed all of his stuff, and he's become a buddy. His name's Phil, and he, whenever he's at a show with my wife and I, he always winds up hanging out at our table, just BSing. He probably talks to my wife as much as he talks to me, and it's great. And I love when he's at my table, because sometimes people will come to my table and ask me very specific questions about my Ghost Rider work, or how many issues I did, and I said, one day, "Oh, Phil," and I ask him, and
he's
Phil
your walking Wikipedia.
Yes, and it's great, because I don't pay attention to that kind of stuff. I'm always thinking about the next story. I'm not looking back as much. So yeah, so Ivan wrote a bunch of it, however many you say he wrote, but it wasn't my character. It was, literally was not my character, because Marvel owned it, and people are, well, for instance, I mentioned Ed Brisson earlier. I was at New York Comic Con a few years ago, and it was before the show really got going. I'm walking down Artist Alley, and I see a young guy sitting underneath a big banner that's got Ghost Rider on it. And I went, "Oh, cool! My banner has Ghost Rider on it as well." And I can see he's got a stack of issue number 1 of his series, and he's talking to a fan, and I thought, well, I'll go talk to him. And so I wait online like anybody would. I don't do that for anybody that I know. I just go over, and like if Fabian Niciez is there, I kiss him on top of his head. And John Romita Jr., I just start immediately making fun of him, and he and I wind up yelling at each other. All very, very good natured, and I think entertaining. But so I waited, and then I get up there, and I see Ed, and and he's treating me very nicely, like I'm an older fan. He didn't know I was legendary, and
she should have learned.
So I just said, "Oh, Ghost Rider, I've always liked that character." I mean, this is me being putting a little piss.
A little facetious.
Yeah. And so I've always liked that character. He said, "Oh, yeah." I said, "Yeah. Oh, Danny Ketch. I'm a big fan of Danny Ketch, too." Thinking in the back of my head, yeah, he helped pay my mortgage for a lot of years. And he said, "Oh, good." And I, just that kind of, thing. And then I said, "Oh, by the way," and I reached out my hand to shake hands with him. And I said, "I'm Howard Mackie. I used to," and that's as far as I got. And all of a sudden, it was like this death grip on my hand, where Ed was holding. I know who you are, Howard, and I was a big fan. And I'm using Danny Ketch. I said, okay, Ed, this is starting to get a little creepy now. You need to let go of my hand. And so
we're crossing the line here, buddy.
Yes, and so he let go, and then Aaron Cooter, who was the artist on that series, he was across the way, and they both started saying to me, "Ooh, we do some pretty rough stuff to Danny in this issue." I said, look, again, not my character. I said, but I would like both of you to know, here I am, the legendary Howard Mackie, very, very nice guy, right? I said, Danny Ketch is me. So anything you do to him, you're basically doing to me. I said,
and
if you can sleep at night with that, you have fun. And but it's just, again, it's one of those things where it's knowing what you signed on for, which it's not, I learned early on, some of the names of characters that I've created, some of them are kind of named after people I grew up with, but never directly. Because, and that was something Mark Grunwald taught me early on, is that, eventually you can create this character, you tell them the story with the best of intentions that you have, but then you're not on the book anymore, and somebody else can pick up the character and do some pretty horrible stuff to it. So just don't ever name somebody absolutely after your kid or your brother or sister or something. Combine names. And that's what I did. I would take the first name of one person I grew up with and attach it to the last name of somebody else. So when the good stuff was going on, they could look at the characters, oh, look, cool, that's my name, but not have to worry about somebody doing some awful shit later on.
So as somebody who's like, to me, the most epic run of Ghost Rider will always be Danny Ketch. At first, I don't know, at least 50 issues to me was magic. So he'll always be, my Ghost Rider, but and he was everywhere at one point in the 90s. Like literally, he was in every book you turned around, he was being shoved in. He kicked Galactus' ass on an episode of Fantastic Four, which I love to give my friend Jesse hell about because he's a big Silver Surfer fan. I'm like, Ghost Rider kicked Galactus' ass and Silver Surfer couldn't. So, I love that sort of stuff. At what point did Marvel, you said you kind of knew when it was starting to pick up and you had clout, but at what point did Marvel realize, holy shit, we've got lightning in a bottle here?
Well, you touched on it. It's that if you look that, again, going from, we can't sell this series, so we shouldn't publish it, to he appeared in almost every comic Marvel was publishing at that time, because what they noticed was if you put Ghost Rider on the cover, the sales bumped. And so everybody, I don't know. I love, Walt Simonson is, just a wonderful, wonderful human being and a phenomenal talent. Ghost Rider and the Fantastic Four, it doesn't seem like the most natural fit, but he made it work, and that's the cool thing. But everybody was wanting to have Ghost Rider, and that was relatively early on. It was certainly in the first, earlier than the first year. Everybody wanted him there, and it led to some awkward conversations sometimes, because the way it works is if somebody uses a character from another editorial office, you've got to get permission from the editorial office, and you've got to, the editor gets the plot and gets plot approval. Sometimes it gets sent off to me. Sometimes I don't care. So I don't read, but I remember one point I was walking by somebody's office, or I walked into somebody's office, and they said, "Oh, Howard, I have," and I will not mention names, I have this writer on the phone who wants to use Ghost Rider in an issue. Okay, cool. That you should talk to Bobby. She's the editor, and he wants to talk to you. He has a question about Ghost Rider. I said, okay. And I take the phone, and the question that this person asked me was, so tell me about Ghost Rider. And that was it. And my response was less than polite. I said, do your fucking job and read the book.
No
I
shit.
handed the phone back to the editor. Because not my job to tell him how he can create a story. So that was it. But Ghost Rider then, I mean, further to your point, he became really popular, and that's when they decided to go into the Midnight Suns storyline. I don't remember what issue that was, but it was going to also lead to the my being able to really get a hold of Blaze at that point by doing Spirits of Vengeance, which I liked. I liked that part. I was not crazy about building a whole, corner of the Marvel universe that I was going to have to share with a bunch of other creators, all of whom were my friends, just so you know. They were all my friends. But I suddenly felt like I was left alone for a big chunk of Ghost Rider because, like I said, nobody expected it to succeed in the beginning. So people just let me do what I wanted to do. Well, now, once you start adding other books in, there's a lot of coordination that has to happen. And so we used to do these writers conferences creator conferences, writers, editors, we'd all get together at a conference center, sit around and kick around story ideas, try to develop stuff. And we had one for the Midnight Suns, and I've seen photos of me at the first one for Midnight Suns, and I am not proud of what I'm about to say, because I was a petulant little child at the beginning of this this conference, because I really didn't want to be there. I did not want to be sharing with a bunch of people to try to figure out a way to.
My choice.
Well, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I felt like Gollum in the friggin' ring, and I'm like, why are you even asking me? I don't care. So literally, if you can envision like a big conference table, okay, everybody is sitting around the table, and on one wall next to the conference table, it was in New York City, there was a whole wall of windows with a line of radiators underneath that had like a cover on it, and so you could sit on that if you wanted to. And everybody else is sitting at the table, and I'm sitting on the radiators, just looking out the window, just saying, oh, yeah, go ahead, do whatever the fuck you want. I don't give a shit. And that was the attitude I went into the meeting. It was completely unprofessional. And like I said, it was like a petulant little child. And then I believe it was Dan Chichester was talking. And he did what was the name of the book? Frank Drake and Night Stalkers. Thank you.
Yeah.
He did Night Stalkers, and we were they were kicking around like, oh, who could be villains? Oh no, we don't want to just keep going back to Zarathos and Centaurius and all that. And he's, well, I was thinking we could do something with, there's the legend of, the first wife of Adam, who was Lilith. And she was the mother of all, and like my head, I probably just about gave myself whiplash. I spun around as he said that, because I knew a little bit about, the myth of Adam having a first wife and, all that. And I said, oh, wait a minute. And all of a sudden I went from sitting on the radiator to, saying, oh, move
your seat type shit.
Let me look. Oh, yeah, we could really do that. And we just started building from there. And that's where I got sucked into the Midnight Suns. And I really enjoyed it. And I give Dan, and whenever I see Dan at conventions these days, I always give him credit for getting me to stop being a pouty little baby. And it was good. And the funny thing is, a number of years ago, I got contacted by a guy who I think he was living in northern Texas. He was from Oklahoma. He was a rabbi who taught religious studies. He was a college professor and a rabbi who taught religious studies. And he was doing a paper, a white paper, an academic paper about the use of um, uh, Hebraic mythology in popular culture. And he wanted to talk to me about Lilith. And he said, well, how did you guys know all of the stuff that you put into the comic about the creation of Lilith? And I said, we knew a little bit and we made it up. And he said, no. He said, that's impossible. You guys were too close to and he started rattling off Hebraic mythology, Babylonian, Assyrian. He said, Lilith is a character, in all of the mythology there, and you guys touched upon a big chunk of it. And I said, He said, and there was only, at that time, and he said, I've done the research since, at that time, there was only one textbook that discussed the character. And it was this big tome that only, there were just a couple of hundred of them, and it was strictly academics were reading it. I said, Rabbi, I'm sorry, but I said, let me explain something to you about comic book writers. We're like a freaking Swiss Army knife of writers, in that we knew a little bit, and then we just made the rest of the shit up. And he was blown away by that. But that really is it. He's, you did this whole thing with the Leviathan and the cutting it open, the scrying. And I said, yeah, made it up. It was, and I can't even tell you who made it up, because that's how we worked when we got to these conferences. It was a bunch of us, and we just threw out ideas nonstop and saw which ones stuck. But that's how we did that stuff. So I mean, that's a very long answer to your question.
That's actually pretty incredible right there. That's wow.
Yeah, but that was it. And I just had to go along when everybody was using it, again, to the point of not my character, not my company. Marvel got to choose.
Well, that was a hell of a run. I'm not going to lie, because I mean, I remember loving, like I said, Ghost Rider. And I was a fiend at that point. Like I had to get the Spirits of Vengeance. I had to get the Midnight Suns. I had the Blaze side book. I mean, I was like,
thank you,
hooked on all this stuff. And I still have these books to this day. It's a massive fan, dog. And to me, I always preferred that version of Johnny myself, where he's just like this, I don't know, kind of like a bounty hunter almost. The Hellfire shotgun. And was there, you created Vengeance as well. And, he wound up being, a cop with a history.
Right.
Was there ever a point where it was kind of floated around to maybe bring Spirit of Vengeance back to Johnny as well? Or did you know, at least for your portion of it, you didn't want Johnny delving back into that?
At that point, it was more, I mean, Danny Ketch was successful.
He had it.
The Blaze was now successful. So the Marvel would not have been interested in, combining the two, nor would I, because, as I said, I could start seeing, Ketch being the younger version of me. And then I got to explore far different things with Blaze that I couldn't.
In the big brother role.
So I know, and, and a lot of times you have to think about it beyond just, the Flaming Skull character itself, because I love that stuff. That caught my attention. But the interesting stuff is like the dynamics of the non-superpowered character. And with Blaze, I got to, if I'm going to write, horror stories, they have to tap into my own worst nightmares. And as I said, when, by the time Blaze, Spirits of Vengeance and Blaze came back, I was a dad. And so any threat to my children was the biggest thing. Well, I couldn't explore that with Danny. But there were a lot of other things I could explore with Danny, and trying to balance, Danny, I mean, if you look at him, I was lifting from early Stan, Ditko, Spider-Man stories. I mean, he was young, he was struggling, he was trying to help his mom out, all that. I mean, there were a lot. I mean, there's so much. Even the first 12 issues I look back on, each issue I introduced, for the most part, I introduced a new villain in those issues. And if you look back on the first year's worth of Spider-Man stories, that's how, we got, everything from the, from the Green Goblin to Scorpion to, Shocker and all that. Stan just introduced a new character every issue. So I was trying to use that as a model for me to see where it would sit.
Well, while we're discussing Spider-Man, you've done quite a bit with Spider-Man as well. As I can talk Ghost Rider all day, but your career spans such large portions. Spider-Man.
I did a few Spider-Man.
Like literally, I have the medallion here, and then we drop down to Spidey. So,
very cool.
Huge nerd. So how did you approach Spider-Man differently than you did Danny?
That's a very good question, because again, I was a brand new writer, and I pitched Ghost Rider when I was still working on staff as an editor. But I at that point, by the time it was launching, I was already a dad, and my wife was pregnant with our second child, and I realized I couldn't do both, all three jobs, as it were, because I was going to work, leaving for the office every morning at around 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night, because I had to commute in, and then I would spend all day editing comics, other people's stories. I came home. It was just in time to tuck my daughter into bed, and then she got into bed, and I went to my desk to write my own stories, and I would work until midnight or later. And there was a certain point where I wasn't paying enough attention to any of them. That's when I decided to leave staff and focus fully on the writing work. And it was a crapshoot. I didn't know if I was going to be able to get enough work. Well, it turned out that was not a problem.
Worked out pretty well.
As soon as I announced I was leaving staff, that's when I got Web of Spider-Man as a writing gig, and which was great. It meant I had 2 monthly books. That was enough for me to live on. And as well, at that point, we used to get incentives, which in other fields it's called royalties, but there's a whole legal reason it can't be. So, and because the books were selling so well, it meant, on the back end, I got good money as well. But I was right at that point. At one point, I was writing Ghost Rider, the regular series. I was writing Web of Spider-Man, and I was writing a Marvel Comics Presents story featuring Havoc, Alex Summers.
I have all those stories. Those are some of my favorite. Havoc's one of my favorite characters.
I like him as well. But so one day I got like copies of all 3 books at the same time. And I did, and it was probably not, because once it's published, as I said, I don't reread them. So I probably got photocopies of each book to read, just to make sure there were no mistakes or anything like that. And I started reading them. And one of the things you learn early on with the writer is characters should all have their own voice. Okay. And so I'm reading all three books, and I realized that Danny Ketch and Peter Parker and Alex Summers all sounded exactly the same, and they all sounded like me. And that can work in some. I mean, I think there are aspects of Peter Parker that do sound like me. I've been known to throw out a quip or two, but that's not a good thing to have all 3 characters sound alike. So I quit Web of Spider-Man. I said, can't do it. It's not good for my career. I got to figure out how to do this better as a writer before I can handle something like this. And so I did. I quit. And then a few months later, I get a phone call from the editor. Danny Fingeroth was the editor of the books at the time. And he said, Howard, Todd McFarlane is wrapping up what we refer to as adjectiveless Spider-Man, because we had Amazing Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, and Web Spider-Man, and then we just had Spider-Man. So adjectiveless Spider-Man, he's leaving. Do you want to take it on? And I remember I said, Danny, did you think the reason I left Web of Spider-Man was because I had a problem with the adjective? And he said, well, no, but and I went and I thought about it. I thought, well, it's been a little bit. There's been a little bit of time between two, and so I took it, and then I wound up being on that book for quite some time until in the last couple of years. I think I was the only Spider-Man writer when we pared down to 2 books. There was Amazing and Adjectiveless, and I wrote them both. So yeah, I've written a few Spider-Man stories.
Absolutely. So when did you guys say, you know what, let's bring the clone back. Let's identify him as Ben Reilly. Let's explore this character a little bit.
Well, I go back to my buddy Terry Cavanaugh. And what happened was, and this is my recollection, it's like everybody has a different memory of how this happens. You could talk to all of us that were present, and we would all have different versions of this, I'm sure. But my recollection, which is the only one you should ever believe, is that it was at an interesting time in comic book sales. And there were a lot of big events that always happen, death of Superman and, whatever, X-Men.
Batman gets his back broke, all this.
All of that stuff. And Marvel had decided that for that upcoming sales period, it was Spider-Man's turn. And they wanted us to come up with something that, at that point, they had already done I think Maximum Carnage, yeah. And they had done the thing where, and I wasn't involved in that, nor was I involved with, where they had Peter's parents come back, and they turned out to be
Richard Mario, and they showed back up.
But they wanted us to come up with something. And the night before, we were having one of these writers' conferences. Again, same hotel, same room. Now that I think of it, with the elevator, I mean the
little less petulant child.
Oh yeah, no, because it wasn't my baby. I mean, Spider-Man, had been around for a while.
A team player this time.
No, absolutely, always a team player. Just had that little glitch, a glitch in the Matrix. Anyway, they wanted us to do something. So the night before, I get a phone call from Terry Cavanaugh saying, Howard, I had an idea that I'm thinking of pitching tomorrow, and I want to run it by you first. And I, sure. And so he starts talking about the Jerry Conway clone story. And number one, that story got published in that spot. I think I mentioned to you where I was a big comic book reader, and then I discovered other interests. And so I was not as familiar with the Jerry Conway story at that particular.
Well, it was really only like 2 issues anyway, like late 70s.
It was a story. It was 2 issues, and so he talks it through with me, and he got to the point where clones are cool, and clones were very popular back then. I don't know if you remember, they made like the cover of Time magazine. I think it was Dolly the sheep was the clone, and so we were trying to tap into something that was kind of in the zeitgeist, and so I said, oh well, that's kind of cool, and he says, and then at the end the clone dies, and Peter takes his body and dumps him down a smokestack, and to incinerate it. And I thought about it, and I'm again not an engineer, but smokestacks don't work that way. You don't go straight from the top hole straight down into fire where it's going to incinerate. I said, so, at best we could have like a beef jerky in there or something, the body could have just gotten mummified in there because you have the smokestack and then there's going to be a series of pipes that go to the incinerator. I said, he's not, that body didn't get burnt. I said, so I think there's something there, and that's what kind of grabbed me. And so he knew I supported him on that. And so the next day when we had the meeting, we together we pitched the story idea. I mean, I think I maybe had a little bit more because of Ghost Rider and stuff. I had a little bit more experience than Terry, the writer. So he wanted to make sure that he had somebody supporting him. But it was, all of the good parts really were from Terry. And so we pitched it, and the editor was unsure about it at the time. And now part of what we were looking to do, just to backtrack a little bit, was we were trying to get Spider-Man and Peter Parker back to a place where why we thought he was most popular when he was, he was young, he was unattached, he was struggling, he was, all of those things. And if you think
he wasn't married with a wife and about to have a child.
Well, and that's the thing. Well, I don't think they were pregnant yet, but he was fully employed. He's married to a friggin' supermodel. They're living in a gorgeous penthouse apartment.
It's a little hard for the everyday man to relate to that.
Exactly. He was not the everyman. And so we were trying, so some people at that point were suggesting divorce. We said, no, that even more doesn't make it ages him rather than makes him younger, because now he's a divorced dude. And so that's what we were trying to create, was a version of Spider-Man that didn't have, or of Peter Parker that didn't have all the baggage at all. And it took some convincing. We couldn't convince the editor right away. He did not like the idea because there was, I don't know, you guys may be too young to remember the TV show Dallas.
I don't remember Dallas.
Okay, and you remember Bobby Ewing, and he in theory gets killed at one point, and then
that's all a dream at the end.
He steps out of a shower, and no, that was all a dream. And he was concerned this would be that it meant that all of the he thought it was a slap in the face to some of the more hardcore readers who would say, then none of my my favorite stories don't count anymore.
Kind of new 52-ish.
Yeah. But we said, no, they count. The difference is this was a real person with real experiences that they happened to. And what we thought was it gives you the ability now to have two characters. And it was supposed to be a 3-month story arc, because our theory, and like I said, I have a notebook somewhere which outlines what was going to happen in each story, was we thought there were 4 Spider-Man titles. Okay. There was Web, Spectacular, Amazing, and Adjectiveless. And if you times that by 3 months, that's
quite a lot of stories.
Well, it's a year's worth of stories. But then what happened was the industry started to implode on everything other than the Spider-Man books. Spider-Man, our sales were actually ticking up when other things were all going down. So the geniuses in marketing and sales said, you can't end this story. You gotta keep it going. At which point I remember saying, excuse me, that's not how story works. The story has a beginning, a middle, and guess what? An end. And we can end this story and then pick up on something else, but the marketing knew better. So that's why you got I don't even remember how long it was, 3 years or more.
It got out there. It did.
Yes. And I look, there are times I sign a lot of comics at conventions, and there are certain comics that I sign that people will come to that took place, during that time, and I'm embarrassed to sign them because there was some stuff I got to do that was fun. I enjoyed, even though I was opposed to bringing the Green Goblin and Norman back towards the end when we resolved the Clone Saga. I really that was an editorial decision. Like my editor and the editor-in-chief said, we need to bring back Green Goblin and Norman Osborn. And I said, oh, come on. He's like one of the few deaths that actually count.
Stuck, yeah.
And I really didn't like it. I did it anyway. And then I was kind of glad I did, because then I got to play with a really cool character and explore the relationship between, Green Goblin and Spider-Man. Yeah, okay, it's great. But Norman and Peter and their relationship that was like this twisted father-son
Love
thing.
hate.
That was really interesting to me as a writer. But so yeah, that's I just very quickly just described the beginning and the ending of the Clone Saga.
It was all over the place, but like I said, I was a fan of it. I enjoyed like that. Take it on Jackal. He became a very interesting character. Gwen's clone. Even Spider Side was interesting. Kane wound up being the dark horse that I think that I took to a little more than I probably should have back then.
How old were you when the Clone Saga came out?
I was in my early teens.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You were who we were writing it for. And when Terry and I observe this, we talk about it all the time. When we go to conventions now, hear very different things about the Clone Saga than we would have heard, 25 years ago. And that people will come to us and say, Ben Reilly was my Spider-Man. And I asked, well, how old were you? I was 15 years old, or I was 14, or I was 12, or whatever. Yeah, that's who we were writing it to, because at that age, you don't want to be reading about the old guy that's married to the supermodel living in a penthouse. You want to read about somebody who's struggling a little bit more. Now, we couldn't de-age him. We couldn't make him go back to high school. But if you take away some of those overt chains of age that happens to us all as we get older, that's what we're aiming for. So that, and the most vociferous critics of the Clone Saga were closer back in the day, were closer to the age you are now.
But they were Peter fans. See, I'm that way when it comes to like DC when they rebooted in New 52. Like I'm one of those, just shit on my continuity, So I get it to a degree, but
the problem I have with DC doing it, no offense to, well, a lot of offense to DC, but they just do it too often.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's
every 2 years now.
Yes, I mean it started with Crisis, and it just every time, and then it's whatever I say. I'm not a DC reader, quite frankly. Never was as much as I was a Marvel reader, but it's like, they did Crisis, and then they do Flash, whatever, Flashpoint, and Flash something else, and another Flash thing, and then suddenly it's the new 52, and then the worst experience of my life in writing comics was I got to do the Ravagers for DC Comics, and the new 52, the second wave. And yeah. I hated every moment of that experience.
Wow. Well, it's almost like they've got to where they say, just throw some books out there. If it takes off, great. And if it don't, we pin ourselves into the corner. We got this crisis button.
Well, that's it. And it's not something that interests me. It's also, it also ties into an older theory, and Marvel is guilty of this as well, and has been for quite a few years. It's like, just put out a new #1. And, and that, well, I mean, when we did it, when I did Spider-Man with Byrne, we relaunched, and it's like, I mean, I kind of liked when I watched the numbers ticking up. I felt like it was part of.
I'm a fan of that as well. I remember reading an interview once where I forget if it was the editor of Marvel or DC at the time, but they were just like, Well, no one really cares about issue 747, but if it's got new #1 on there, they think it's new and interesting and hip. And I was like, dude, come on.
I think that ship has also sailed. There was a time when it did. Anytime you put #1, sales went through the roof. Now it's done so often that it's like, who cares?
It almost makes you feel like, should you invest time in this book?
Well,
I'm a fan of the legacy number.
Especially since you really know they're just writing for the trade. And so why bother buying the monthly book where, when the bulk of my work was done, it was the monthly sales is what we were shooting for.
To chase all these issues.
Yeah. And now, anyway, but I don't want to talk smack about the companies, although I'm more than happy to do it in front of them. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, since you did touch on DC there, I knew I had looked because I couldn't remember what all DC you had done. It was a very small amount of DC, but I do have to ask about the amalgam stuff because you did Speed Demon for that, and was that something that you got to visualize how you wanted and use the characters you wanted, or was that all editorial said do this with these people, or because I love the amalgam stuff. It was really cool.
Honestly, I was the natural. They wanted to do something with Ghost Rider, so I was the Ghost Rider guy. And I believe and Mark Grunwald was a big part. Mark Grunwald and Mike Carlin were the brains behind the amalgam stuff. And Mark said, "Hey, Howard, do you want to do something with Ghost Rider and the Demon from?" And it was like one of the few characters I remembered following when I was younger. And I said, oh yeah, that could be kind of fun. And that, I like getting those kinds of assignments where, where it could just be a challenge. I mean, some of the most fun things I've written have been that kind of thing where I didn't think I wanted to do it. And then I started sitting down and it started to become a puzzle for me. And I like it. I like that aspect of it. I mean, I did some work for Zenoscope a few years ago, and they were doing a bunch of these Ripley, they had the license for Ripley's Believe It or Not. And I wrote some, like all these little 6-page stories where they would ask me to, do something about the Winchester Mansion, or do something about, the true story behind the Beauty and the Beast. And it was kind of fun. It was like, I just got to do a bunch of research and then try to create a very concise story about it. So, and that's how I felt about the Speed Demon book, amalgam. And the funny thing about that is a number of years ago, I've written enough stuff that sometimes some of the projects fade from my memory. I mean, again, legendary.
That means you're accomplished at that point.
Or it just means I'm old.
I've done some things.
But I remember doing a convention down in Mexico City. And I signed more of that Speed Demon comic than I have ever signed in my life, because it, just like the month or two before, had been printed in Spanish down there. And so everybody that came to my table had a copy of that book all these years later. And it was kind of fun to do it, and to try to remember what I wrote, quite frankly. But again, to your initial point, you said, what stuff I did for DC. I worked for Marvel on that. That was the Marvel side. So I was only working with the Marvel group. DC, I did that short Ravagers run, which was just abysmal. And then I did one Batman black and white story that I had a really fun time. I got to work with Mark Chiarello, who was the art director at DC at the time, and I knew Mark from when he worked at Marvel, but phenomenal. I mean, he's a phenomenal artist, but he's phenomenal editorial talent as well. So that was fun, and he and I just we had fun just come. And then Chris Samney was the artist who wound up going on to do a lot of really good things after my little Batman story. But yeah, aside from that, I've not done work for DC. I would say 99.9% of my writing work has been
Make
with
mine Marvel.
Yep.
I will say I tried to research. I was like, maybe I was like, I knew he had to do something for DC. It's been such a storied career, and I was like, man, when I looked it up, I was like, that's really not that much. And I was like, well, maybe it wasn't a good fit or something. I wasn't sure, but
no, it wasn't a good fit, but also I'm not as familiar with the DC characters.
gotcha.
I mean, I grew up reading. I did read uh DC characters. I read Batman, Superman, Flash, all of that stuff. But also, honestly, the character I would be least interested in writing is Superman. I have no take on what I would do with Superman. And the funny thing is when Mark Chiarello asked me to write the Batman story, I was a very accomplished writer at that point. As I said, in my career, I've touched upon pretty close to every Marvel character, whether, it was doing a book for them or a guest appearance or whatever in one of the books that I wrote on a regular basis. And I wrote Spider-Man for close to 10 years, I think. That's pretty big deal.
It's a pretty iconic run.
What's that?
It's a pretty iconic run.
Well, yeah, or and look, people come to me and say, they'll start with Clone Saga, and I say either thank you or I'm sorry. But I suddenly I get this what was it, 8-page story from Chiarello to do with Batman, and I felt like a rank amateur suddenly. It was like I'm getting to write fucking Batman, for God's sakes. And it was intimidating for me, to the guy who wrote Spider-Man for 10 years. I'm thinking, oh God, Batman. So it just but the DC, and the funny thing about DC, especially back then when I did the New 52, I came up to the offices one day, and I would say close to half the staff, the editorial staff, were people that I worked with at Marvel in the heyday. I mean, it was Bob Harris was editor-in-chief, Bobby Chase was my editor at one point, Chiarello was there. I mean, and I could just list name upon name of people I knew from the late 80s and early 90s. And but just I've never had an affinity for the DC characters. I think it has been said by others I know. My buddy Terry Kavanaugh is the one that says it to me the most. But part of it is that DC has gods. Everyone from Superman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, even Batman in his own way. He's a friggin' billionaire and can do whatever he wants.
They're not the everyday relatable character.
No, and whereas Marvel has people who have
problems and issues,
powers, but they also have problems in everyday lives and all of that stuff. So I think that attracted me as a reader, and then certainly attracted me as a writer back in the day. Oh.
I guess with Marvel, they're all assuming like more reluctant heroes. Not that they're shy from the task.
Oh yeah,
with great power comes great responsibility. It's that's not what I wanted. I wanted to be me.
Right.
But I have this responsibility now.
Yeah, and so it's always more interesting to write about the person beneath the mask than it is to write about the mask itself. So.
Good. Monster, I can't believe you hadn't hit on X Factor or Factor X any of this.
So I had thought about those, but the thing that stands out the most to me about and it's not that those were by far not necessarily they didn't stand out, because I'm a huge X title reader. I read all of them, but the one thing that I always remember about X-Men, or in particular, was that crossover that got me into Ghost Rider, because I didn't buy the first 20 issues of Ghost Rider until it was like 26, 27, somewhere along in there when they crossed over with
Shame
X-Men
on
with
you,
the
son.
Brood. And then I went back and bought every issue afterwards.
Probably one of the either the most creative or least creative titles. And I can't remember if I came up with it or somebody else did. What was it? Brood Trouble in in Little. Oh shoot! Now I can't remember the title of it. But yeah, no, that was fun. I mean, that was one of those situations where we did the crossover because the X Office wanted to, because Ghost Rider at that point was, in terms of sales, on par with the X books. And we thought if you put the two together, it'll
Boom.
even more sales. And I mean, and that's frequently how stuff happened. I mean, any X work I got was based. I mean, okay, I mentioned Terry Cavanaugh. He's one of my best friends. One of my other best friends is Bob Harris, who is ultimately, he was editor-in-chief of Marvel, and then DC. But Bob, in the beginning, he was like the top editor in comics because he edited the X books, and he kind of took the X book. I mean, the X books had been doing really well, and he seemed to be able to shepherd them into even a higher place. And I remember, to the point where Bob could poach any creators he wanted to because of sales. I told you, we got royalties. So if he asked somebody to leave one book and come to one of his books, people said yeah, because it was going to mean big bucks.
Cha-ching.
So I remember one day, I happened to, boy, I can't believe I have this. I just emptied out my bag for my mention, but I was asked at some point to do a prestige format, like well, this is the book I'm talking about. Can you see it? It's blue.
Oh, yeah.
I have that.
I do too.
And I was asked to do something. They thought, Ghost Rider, Wolverine, Punisher. I mean, as John Romita Jr. said when he got assigned, this is a license to print money. Those were the three top individual characters at Marvel at the time, and you throw them all three into a book, and it sold very, very, very well. Okay, and I came up to Marvel offices the day that the sales were released to editorial. And I walk into the bullpen, and across the way, I could see Bob Harris, my buddy, and because we started out as assistants together. And Howard, come here. And as soon as the way he said it, I realized this is not my buddy that's calling me. This is an editor.
A favor.
And I said, yeah, sure, Bob. He said, well, walk with me. And so we start walking. He said, I just saw the sales figures on Hearts of Darkness. And I said, yeah, they're pretty good. And he said, yeah. He said, have you ever wanted to work for the X Office? And I gave him an answer nobody had ever given him. I said, no, not really. No. And he said, and he just stopped. He said, what? Well, why not? I said, he said, they have really good sales. I said, did you look at how much that sold? I said, Ghost Rider is doing really well for me right now. He said, well, is there any X character you've ever really wanted to write? And I said, no, not really. He was like blown away by this. And then finally I said, kind of like what Chris has done with Gambit. That's, he's a new character and he's interesting. And he's great. Let's have lunch. And that's how the first Gambit series came about. And that's how I got into doing any X work at all. And it was strictly because, and again, they just let me kind of do what I wanted to do. I did a bunch of research on New Orleans, and I went from there. But what I liked about Gambit was he wasn't so tied down to all of the continuity that had gone before. And
there was still a little bit of freedom with him at that time.
Well, exactly. And so I just got to do my very self-contained story and got to do the thing with Rogue. I created a bunch of characters there. I think one of the pages I'm the most proud of is, people ask me, what's your favorite story? I don't know any of that shit. But I do the first page, the Gambit limited series. I absolutely loved it. It's the introduction of a character called the Tithe Collector. And it's also, a lot of that has to do because Lee Weeks' artwork, Lee and Klaus, but the storytelling on that page is like a master class in how to draw comic books, as far as I'm concerned. Lee just, blew it out of the park. And so, yeah, so that, that's how, and that ultimately, you mentioned I did some X Factor work for a long time, but then that book got canceled, or was going to get canceled, and I had an idea for the ending, which was to have Alex Summers, Havoc, die. And when I mentioned that to the editors, they went, "Oh," I said, "Oh, oh," I said, "But wait, it gets better." And that's how the Mutinex title was.
That was the one I was going to ask you about next, because that was one I really enjoyed, because it was a favorite character and in a whole different setting for what went on.
And again, it's one of my favorite things to write because nobody expected it to do very well. They didn't, so they left me alone. And then it did do well. and the only reason it was canceled was because they wanted the name there was a Mutinex TV show.
Yeah, that was the only thing that tarnished that book to me, because I was not into that TV show as much as I was the book.
It's the reason the book got canceled.
I did not know that.
Still doing pretty well, but the guy who it was Avi Arad, who was he was like an early partner at Marvel. He worked with the guys that bought it. He wanted the name, but he was focused on Hollywood, and he wanted the name for the TV show. And so, I mean, it was, I don't know that it would have gone on for much longer, but I was left very much alone. And then if you think about it, if you read the Ultimates comics, Brian, and it was basically Mutinex was an early version of the Ultimate. Yeah. I just got to remember my favorite storylines from comics that had a divergence point. And, it's like, oh yeah, I remember that X-Men story where Storm was being seduced by Dracula. And well, what if he succeeded? And what if she got turned into a vampire? And that's where she became Bloodstorm. And just a very funny story. Again, relating back to the early part of the conversation, I don't reread my own stuff. But then about 5-6 years ago, I was doing Baltimore Comic-Con, and somebody had contacted me. It was like an anniversary of Mutinex, and they wanted me to do a panel on it. And I said, guys, I'll tell you right now, I can talk about anything. I said, but if you start going into the weeds, like, oh, what were you thinking when you did this story, or blah, blah, I said, I'm not the guy to talk about that. That you probably know more about that than I do. I said, but I can make this work. Said, fine. So right before we left for Baltimore, my wife was down there with me. They happened to put out the trade paperback, the first trade paperback or collected edition of Mutinex. So I just threw it in my bag, got down there. The night before, I'm sitting up in bed in the hotel, basically cramming for the test. The next day, I'm like reading this thing that I haven't read since I wrote it. And my wife was laughing because, number one, she's never seen me actually read a comic book, because like my work I keep separate from the rest of it. So my office is where all of my comics are. We're not in my office right now. I'm rearranging everything right now, so I just have a little corner in my bedroom. But that's where all my comic artwork is, all my comics are, and all that. So that's where I do my work. But so number one, she's laughing at just seeing me read something, and she's been with me since the beginning and has never seen me read a comic. And two, I'm paging through the trade, and I'm going, oh, that's cool. That's really cool. And then I get to another part. Oh, I didn't see that coming. Like, and I don't remember how much you remember of it, but early on, they keep talking about Alex's and Madeline's son being off with the nanny. The nanny is the nanny. So they keep referring, and then the big reveal is the nanny is Electra. And I went, oh man, that is so cool. That was foreshadowed, and I didn't see it coming. My wife said, "Howard, you did write this, right?"
When you pop yourself, you've done something.
I technically I wrote it, but that guy was a lot younger than I am now, and he was a different writer. So not like I said, I don't remember it, but I enjoyed it, and the reason I enjoyed it was because they just let me do what I wanted to do, and so I can see there's what I enjoy most if I look back on some of my writing is I like the work where I can see me in it as opposed to my trying to make parts come together. Like the Ravagers I hate because there's nothing of me in there. It was just stuff they wanted me to do at DC, and it sucked. But when I got left alone, like early Ghost Rider stuff, Hearts of Darkness, the X Factor Gambit was pretty much that was me, and that's when it's the most that's when I like doing what I'm doing. Oh.
See, when you have that history there, taking 3 or 4 separate things that's you perceive to be starting out as an underachiever and becoming way overachiever, you can't scoff at being legendary at this point.
Yeah, I grimace at the word legendary. Just
you're a young legendary, sir.
Well, thank you.
Well, I know we've gone for quite a while. We've kept you here for almost 2 hours, and you do have a family and a home life, so we don't want to keep you too much longer just because you've got things to go do. But one last question before we let you go is there any upcoming projects or any conventions or anything you're going to that you'd like to share with the audience that you'll be at soon?
Sure. I do. I have a few things, some of which I can't mention because of confidentiality agreements and everybody.
I understand that fully.
Over there. Yes, I do have. I do have the website with my buddy Terry Kavanaugh. It's inksmith.com. It's INKSMYTH because we wanted to sound sophisticated.com. And we do some custom comics, but we use it as a way to also get some outside work. We've got some stuff, a couple of projects we're working internationally. I'm trying to. I have a follow-up in my mind to the Danny Ketch Ghost Rider story, and I just haven't gotten off my ass. Or I guess technically, given what I do, I have to get on my ass to writing it out and sending it to Marvel, see if they're even interested. Like I said, I don't know. I understand that the Ghost Rider series, the Ketch series did well. Like the first issue in particular sold out. But I haven't heard anything from Marvel about doing a follow-up. I might pitch something to them and see if they're
might be a good time because they're just releasing that new Danny Ketch Ghost Rider Marvel Legends figure this month, and that's amazing looking. Yeah,
sent that to me. So, yes, I may do that. And then in terms of conventions, this is the slowest year I've had in a while, intentionally so. Because as I said earlier, it was beginning of the year was rough in terms of COVID and other crap. But I do the next show that I have coming up is Heroes Con, which is a phenomenal convention. If you have not been there, you should, because it's very, very focused on comics, and it's the right vibe, that's for me. There are bigger shows, there are smaller shows. This is the sweet spot, Heroes Con. And then the other one is, and that's in Charlotte, North Carolina. And then at the end of the summer, I'm doing Terrificon, which is in Connecticut. Fantastic show. And both of those shows, one of the things I like in particular is there was a year that I did Terrificon and they did not do I was not on any panels, and I went to the organizer and I said, "You do realize that I've worked with about 75% of your guests, either as their editor or we
Don't be
come
sleeping on Howard like that. Come on.
But anyway, it is so those are the only two shows I have coming up. I've had to turn down a few. I was supposed to go to I was invited to Dublin, Ireland, and to Hungary, to Budapest, to do a show, but I'm taking a little slow this year. So that's it. That's what I've got coming up.
Awesome. Well, we definitely thank you for coming. And again, not to rush you off by any means. We could sit here and talk all day, but you have a home life too, so we
Thank
don't want
you.
to keep you away from
I
that.
appreciate it. And if you ever want to have me come back, we can do that. You can have me and my buddy Terry, and we can talk.
We would love that.
We would love that.
Absolutely.
And you know, I will pester the hell out of you in the email. So
You're
don't think we won't hit you back.
You're good. You're good because I mean I know there are a bunch of other people that have been trying to get me, that some of those emails just got buried, and
We got you here.
You got it.
Well, sir, this is quite an honor. We appreciate it. Thank you very much. Like Monster said, we've held you, but we appreciate it.
No. Thank you, and thank you for allowing me to ramble on for as long as I did. So thanks for having me.
All right, you have a great evening.
Or afternoon. I may focus on the afternoon first.
Yeah, I'm used to us recording late.
Yeah, well, and like I said, I really do appreciate you guys adjusting for me.
Anytime.
Okay.
Anytime. We would love to have you back. And again, thank you so much for coming. And hopefully you have a wonderful rest of your day and just have a great until we see you again.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
You guys have a good time.
Yes, sir.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All right, we're back now. Hopefully everybody enjoyed what they got out of that. It was very fun. We very much appreciate Mr. Mackie coming on. That was a really fun interview to do, very informative. He shared a lot of behind the scenes information, talked to us a lot about what he did and how he got into things and what his methods are, and that was just so much fun for us to do. So with that, though, since it was a longer interview, we said we were going to skip Nerd Out. So it's almost time for us to get out of here today. But before we get out of here, Hassel, tell everybody where they can find us at.
You can find us on, well, I'm going to start. I'm going to give thanks to Geek Network and Metal Ninja Studios who helped us, get this interview today. So thank them and Mr. Mackie. But you can find us on both of those platforms, Spotlight Media. You can find us on Instagram at the Nerdy Manroom Show. You can find us on Facebook, Hassel Hutchinson via the Nerdy Manroom Show. You can find us on Twitter, Nerdy MR Show. So we're everywhere.
And after you go check us out at all those different platforms or your favorite one, whichever one you find us on, you don't have to go to every single one of them. Just support us at least on one. Make sure you go.
YouTube preferably.
Well, you know what? Geek Network and Metal Ninja helped us out a lot with this one, so I'm not going to say preferably on this one. But
I'm talking the long run.
All right, I'll give you that one. But while you're checking us out, go check out our friend. Go support Big Rob at his channel of Big Rob's House of Entertainment and No Chinese Food, where he gives great reviews, toy hunts, and toy unboxings at times. And hopefully he gets back to his Canon films, because we haven't seen one of those in a while. So Rob, I'm putting in a request in for a Canon film, and I want you to find the campiest one you can and review it, just because I got to hear that one. But after you go check us out and you go check out Big Rob, don't forget to go check out our sponsors. We want to give a big thank you to These Own Collectibles. You can find them on the internet at theseowncollectibles@gmail.com and on Facebook at These Own Collectibles, or in their store at 305 Main Street, Tifton, Georgia. Go there and fulfill all your nerdy needs on Ghost Rider, Web of Spider-Man, whichever one of Howard's projects you prefer. They've got most of them. So go pick those up there and help them support the local artist community by supporting their cause of bringing unity through community. Fandoms unite. And stick around at the end credits. You'll see some shout outs to some of our friends and some of our Geek Network and Metal Ninja Studios family members. You can see them in the closing credits. But then come back and join us here next time. We're going to have a surprise episode just because we're still working on what that one's going to be, and we can't reveal it right now. But until then, ride like the Midnight Suns.